Hello everyone, here we are, continuing our way through Swamiji's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. And look at that. I'm impressed. I haven't really looked at it, the inches, in quite a while. You know, it's quite something to go through this verse by verse, every single verse, and stopping to speak about each one. I mean, it's an epic. It's an epic piece of spiritual literature which has lasted for centuries. And interestingly, you know, sometimes things don't go. This was created, Arjuna and Krishna were at the transition point from Dwapara to Kali, just the same transition point we're in now, except it was Dwapara ending, descending, Kali beginning. And so it went all through Kali Yuga descending, all through Kali Yuga ascending, and then here we are again at the same transition point, you would be on the horizontal line, the same, except this time we're going into greater enlightenment instead of lesser. And this scripture has been through both of the Kali Yugas, and now because Master focused on it, and he's bringing in the Dwapara Yuga version of it, and this commentary is meant to be, Master said that millions would find God through his commentary on the Gita. So it's just, what I'm commenting on is how long-lasting this scripture is, because it's not only gone through all these Kali Yugas, but it's being positioned to go all through Dwapara Yuga again too. The more things change, the more they stay the same, is I guess what I'm thinking of, because the teaching here is so central. So we're up to chapter 3 of the Gita. There's 18 chapters, and we're on stanza 22 of chapter 3. And Krishna says, O son of Pritha, which is his name for Arjuna, no further duty compels me. Krishna's using the capital M, me, meaning the cosmic Lord. O son of Pritha, no further duty compels me. There is no state left for me to attain, and nothing in the three worlds, material, astral, or causal, for me to gain. Yet still I work on for the upliftment of others. There, where all uplifting work is done, am I. So it's written as a capital M-E, but it's Krishna speaking as the avatar, as the incarnation. So he's not talking about God beyond creation when he uses that particular me. He says, nothing compels me. Here I am living apparently as a human being, having embraced the entire human experience, but there's no state left for me to attain, which is to say, I am not working because I still have karma to work out. See, all of us are working, and later on Swami makes the reference to, you have to, the need for right action, which leads to release from karmic involvement. The reason for right action for the soul still bound in delusion is that they gradually have to refine the consciousness by right action so that all karma will be dissolved. But Krishna speaks of himself, nothing compels me. There's no further realization for me to have. I have the highest state of God realization. I was born free. He said, nothing in the three worlds, material, astral, or causal, for me to gain. So, no compulsion, no achievement possible, nothing in any of the three worlds, causal, astral, or physical, that he could acquire, because he's already infinite. And yet, Krishna says, I work for the upliftment of others. And there also he says, there where all uplifting work is done, am I. So what we're looking at, let me just look at this for a second, because these run together. There's several points here. Yes, here, it's in the next verse that he speaks of it. Let me just read the next one, 3:23. O Arjuna, because if I were to cease acting in creation for even a moment, man too would imitate my inactivity. So he's speaking both as the cosmic Lord, and he's also speaking as the avatar. So for the second verse, the point is that he works, Krishna continues to work, and he works for the benefit of others, because what the avatar is setting up for us is he tells us what the perfect man looks like. And that's what Swami would talk about Yogananda. He said, Yogananda was simply the perfection of what a human being could be. And he also was the perfection of divinity, but Swamiji would often comment to us that he was also simply the perfection of humanity in his kindness, in his loyalty, in his sense of humor, in his exuberance and enthusiasm for life, and in his absolute dedication to do everything he could to help others. Swamiji, at the end of his life, went, in the last year or two of his life, went to Medjugorje in Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia. I'm not sure what they call it right now, but he went to that town where the Divine Mother has been appearing for some 30 years now to certain visionaries. And he had a particularly deep encounter with the visionary called Viska. And he said to her, because she was about to have a visitation with the Divine Mother. Is that true? I'm not sure whether she had a vision in front of him or whether he met with her separately. But he said, separate from that vision, he said, when next you are with Divine Mother, ask her if there's anything else I can do for her. And then the way Swami finished that sentence, I've done everything I could think of, but ask her if there's more that I can do. And I contemplated that for a long time. I've done everything that I could think of to do. Now, I spent 45 years in very close association with Swamiji from when I was in my early 20s until his passing 6 years ago, in my late 60s. And he did everything he could think of. I mean, I want to sort of give you a feeling for what that's like. He was a constant fount of creative ideas, just an endless fount of endlessly creative ideas that, and then he would apply absolute energy to following through and executing those ideas. One of the very last books he wrote was this book, and he wrote this one, he was in his house in Pune, Love Perfected, Life Divine. There was one novel that Master was said to have read all the way through in his lifetime, and it was written by a woman author named Marie Corelli. And it was written about 100 years ago, I believe. And Marie Corelli was a very, very popular author at the time, and a very fine writer of fiction. And she was very unusual because she wrote on spiritual themes. And she did her best to write these really elevated stories with beautiful, elegant plots and characters and so on. But she wasn't as enlightened as she might have been, so she could only bring her stories and her characters up to a certain point. Swamiji always enjoyed Marie Corelli's writing, and he particularly liked this particular book, which now suddenly I can't remember what it was the rewrite of. What was it? Which was it? Oddly enough, I sort of have a question mark as to what the book was, which book she rewrote. It'll come to me, whatever it is, but it doesn't matter. But Swamiji, at the end of his life, because the theme of this book is soulmates, and soulmates in the most beautiful, sort of the way the heart longs for union with another person. And the story that Marie Corelli, Love Everlasting, that's what the book was called. The book that Marie Corelli wrote was too romantic and too human. It didn't have the power that the true principle of soulmates has, which is beyond the ordinary human passion, where two souls who are attuned to God unite in God. So Swami just took it upon himself to rewrite her book. And this was the result of it. And he took her basic plot, but he In all the places where she didn't have enough understanding to lift it, he lifted it. I mean, this book is, I've done everything I could think of to do. There was nothing in it for him. Nothing compelled him, and there was nothing for him to gain by doing it. He did it entirely and only for the possibility that it might be of benefit to others. And that's how an avatar lives, just for the possibility of what they can do for the benefit of others. Now, that is really an extraordinary life plan that is so much beyond the ordinary human being. But when you see it expressed, as I saw it expressed in Swami, as Krishna describes himself, as Swami saw it expressed in Master, it's stunningly compelling, because what you see in it is you see this freedom to love, this freedom to give, that is really it really exemplifies everything that each one of us is longing to be. So this is what Krishna says: nothing impels me, I have nothing to gain, I have no more realization, but I keep working, because I'm trying to show you what it is, how you have to be in order to be like me, just exactly. There's a story that's told about Master when he was urging a particular task on a disciple. And the disciple was quite reluctant and didn't really want to do it. And then the disciple said to the Guru, to Master, well, of course you can do it, sir, because you're a master. And then Master, Swamiji said, thundered his answer. Yes, and what do you think made me a master? He said, it was by doing. And so that's the picture we have, by doing, by constantly coming up to the edge of our fears and our self-protectiveness, and I need this for my security, and this is what I have to have, and just pushing right through it, just pushing right through it for the benefit of others. That's how the masters live. Even Krishna here on the battlefield, with Arjuna, there was this huge worldly conflict between the cousins, between two branches of the same family, for who was going to rule the kingdom. And there was no compelling reason why Krishna had to get involved. He had nothing to gain, but it was for the benefit of mankind. And then he has this other phrase there, where all uplifting work is done, there am I. And Swami puts it this way. He said, at the heart of all spiritually uplifting work is the presence of God, because it's the presence of God that lifts us and inspires us to do it. And it's then the grace of God which gives us the power to persevere. See, all the scriptures and all the masters and all the truth of life is trying to break this essential confusion we have, which is that I am solitary in this world. The ego makes us feel isolated. It makes us feel like where my body is who I am. And because my body is separate from every other body, therefore I am separate. And the body is hungry, and the body is cold, and the body needs a home, and the body wants to be loved. I don't just mean the physical self, but the self-defined, which is to say the infinite spirit identified with this limitation, which is how Master defined ego. The ego tells us that I am separate. And then the grace of God comes and tells us, no, you're not. You're one with the infinite. And this is the conflict that we're fighting all the time. Why do we feel that we're tired? Why do we feel we get our feelings hurt when people don't treat us in a certain way? Why do we get afraid? We're afraid of pain, we're afraid of hunger. Right now, this is May, the end of May 2020. We're afraid that our whole world as we have known it is not going to come back after this period of isolation imposed upon us by this weird virus that has invaded our planet from who knows where. And all of these fears come because if I am separate from the universe, then I can be hurt. If I am one with the universe, if I am moving as a manifestation of God, so that divine power inspires us to believe that that the more I give to help others, the more I focus my life on uplifting the world, the more I'll have of that which I seek. And that very idea is given to us by the power of the Spirit. So wherever uplifting work is done, there am I in the midst of it, spiritually uplifting. And then Swami says, the devotee who serves God sincerely and with loving devotion need never be anxious that God might possibly be displeased with him. Isn't that a beautiful thought? Because so many of us live in fear somehow that we haven't quite measured up. But wherever the devotee who serves God sincerely and with loving devotion. Now, serving God sincerely and with loving devotion doesn't mean that you have to sit in front of a microphone, as I often do, and talk about the meaning of the Bhagavad Gita. This is just what this is the action needed for me gradually to be released from karmic involvement. But sincerely and with great devotion serving God means whatever you do, do it sincerely with devotion to God. Whether you're scrubbing floors or cleaning hotel rooms or taking care of children or working in an office, just whatever it is that we're doing, take God with us and see our very actions as being an expression of our relationship to God, and make our constant prayer. Swamiji said so many times, our constant prayer, how can I serve you? And in every decision, how can I serve you? And if the work that we're doing is not inherently in itself God reminding, then we have to pray to God to help us to remember Him while we do it. So that whatever action it might be, and then we're doing it to earn the money, to be able to take care of ourselves, to provide for others, to be generous with what we earn, or merely to give us another day to meditate and to pray, and another Sunday to go to a Sunday service, whatever it might be. As long as we're sincere and loving in our efforts to serve God, we need never be anxious that God might possibly be displeased with us. These are very important thoughts to keep in mind. So then we come to, he says, if I were to cease acting in creation for even a moment, man too would imitate me nonetheless. He says, Krishna is saying that an avatar in human form deliberately sets of an example of how man might live. And then Swami says, many spiritual teachers counsel their followers to consider rather the actionless state of the Supreme Spirit, and tell them if they want to attain that state to be inactive themselves. And this is a confusion that Krishna and now Swamiji are trying to straighten out. And this isn't an idea that comes up sort of in the average person's mind, but when I was first starting out on the spiritual path, I was 19, and I became involved with a group of friends, and eventually I started living in Palo Alto, right where I am right now, and there was one man who was the particular sort of ringleader of the group, and we would all study the Vedanta teachings together. And there was a great deal in that group of that the best thing to do is to do nothing, because you would get this spiritual idea that it's all delusion, it's all a dream, God is in charge, it's always going to be a constancy of light and dark, so why would I take any action at all? And I was with these, and they were very clever, intelligent people, and they would talk themselves into a kind of indifference to other people and a kind of indifference to the necessity to live dynamically. And intuitively, I always knew it was wrong, but I was never smart enough to be able to argue with them as to tell them why it was wrong. I could just feel that it was wrong. And I didn't have Swami as an example at that point, and I hadn't read Autobiography of a Yogi. I didn't have Master or Swamiji to remind me. So what I'm saying is that whether or not any of you are infected with that thought, it's a very, very common thought. And we get very confused. We just can't remember why. And so a lot of what happens on the spiritual path, which is why we make such a point of our line of gurus, and why I speak so much about Swami Kriyananda, and why Swami spoke so much about Master, and why Master spoke about Sri Yukteswar and about Babaji, is because the mind can just spin all kinds of strange ideas. And so what you have to see is you have to be in the company of someone whose spirituality is intuitively perceived. And that's the experience that I had with Swamiji. And that's the experience that many people have had with him or with Yogananda. Even they may never have met Yogananda in the body. They read Autobiography of a Yogi and they can feel his consciousness, or they can see his picture, and they know this man is the truth. He's the personification of exactly what he says he is, which is the infinite spirit. Then you look at how he lived. And Master campaigned back and forth across the country and bought Mount Washington, and then developed 3 or 4 other properties, and was constantly writing and helping people and trying to find a way to expand things. He, more than anyone, knew that it was a dream. And yet the way he participated in the dream was to work tirelessly for the benefit of others. So I joke a lot about what I call reverse engineering on the spiritual path, which is you start with a conclusion and then you figured out how you got there. My experience of life with Swamiji was very much that way, that when he would assert something or behave in a certain way, the purpose of which was not immediately obvious to me, instead of trying to defeat his point of view in order to hold on to my own, I tried as much as possible to, at least for the moment, suppress my point of view so that I could try to understand why his point of view was the correct one. Because I was working backwards from the state of realization that was self-evident to me, that if this is how he behaves, then this must be how such a person of realization behaves. Actually, I use the same on myself, because many things I have done over the years, and I would say this was especially true early, but it was it's been helpful to me even not so long ago, is that I'm very deeply sincere on the spiritual path. I might not be very competent, but I'm very sincere. And that I just know. I just am. I believe completely in what I'm doing, and what I put forward is who I am. There's just, I'm not pretending. So I would say to myself, I am a sincere devotee, and if I make this kind of a mistake, if I fall into this kind of a mood, if I have to confront this kind of karma, if I experience this kind of a loss, whatever it might be, this must be what happens to sincere devotees. And a very simple formula like that can be enormously important, because the dark force is always trying to persuade us that God doesn't really love us, to persuade us that our efforts are futile, that what's the point anyway? This is why Swami puts that in. If anyone who serves God sincerely and with loving devotion need never be anxious that God could possibly be displeased with him. So here I am, I'm a sincere devotee, and this is what I've done. It's not a sign of God's displeasure. It's just what happens to sincere devotees. Now, by now I've integrated that a lot deeper into myself, and I have much more confidence, even when awful things happen, or I do things that I deeply regret. I don't have to work quite so hard to talk myself back to center, but it's partly because I have taken that mantra, I am a sincere devotee, into my core, so that it comes back. It comes back when I need it. So we have this example of how Master and Krishna on the battlefield. You know, it's just interesting, because I think of Krishna as writing the Gita, and I know the Gita took place on a battlefield, but Krishna wasn't writing the Gita. He was on the battlefield with Arjuna. He was trying to get Arjuna through this huge battle in which the whole hundreds, or I don't know how many, but the whole Kshatriya group would be wiped out. All these great souls would be annihilated. I mean, it was total involvement. And Krishna says, I have to keep doing this because if I stop, others will stop. You know, Swami also gives a very interesting point here when he gives the argument against, about why doing nothing does not actually lead to spiritual realization. And what he does quite simply is you take the idea of inaction, just indifference to the world, not paying attention, not trying to help others. He said, and you take it to its logical conclusion, and by its logical extension, you can see the folly. This is a method for understanding what is true that Swamiji often suggested. In myself, when I am trying to think something through, I often take the most extreme position. I mean, I do this habitually. I just take it to its most extreme position and see if it still works. So Swami uses as the example, the most extreme position of inaction, he says, would be an opium den. I mean, an opium den is not something that we see a lot of anymore, but an opium den, you see it in the movies, you know, everybody is just kind of semi-passed out and moving around in kind of a dream, and the energy is very slothful and everybody's lost in their own world. Or you can think about drunks or people who are stoned out on drugs, which is what opium is, of course, but an opium den was a particular image. He said it's the essence of inactivity. It's like this world is a dream, why should I bother? And that's what it looks like in its final extension. And then you compare that to what the life of a master looked like, what Krishna's life looked like, what Master did with his, what Swami did with his life, where you see this extraordinarily beautiful, dynamic flow of energy with all these books and this wonderful music, and in Swami's life, which we saw, hundreds, ultimately thousands of people whose lives are changed for the better because he was there. And you ask yourself, opium den? Or Swami Kriyananda? Like, which example do I really want to follow? And so we dismantle that idea that because this world is a dream, there's nothing for us to do in it. In fact, the opposite, because this world is a dream, with perfect detachment, we can be the instrument of God in it. Because you see, that's what we're doing. And this is where we talked about this a couple of, maybe last session or the one before, where Swami talked about how uplifting ourselves spiritually really is the way to change the world. That's how you change the dream. The dream is always going to be light and dark. But the material world dream, the manifestation of creation, is literally a backdrop and a scene. I was trying to think of. It's a set that you're moving through. It's a three-dimensional set you're moving through, because what we're doing is the soul, the jiva, is threading through its karma in order to finally be liberated from the dream. We take action in order to release ourselves from karmic involvement. So it's not like the set ever comes into perfect balance. It is always going to be this moving reality of light and dark. And no matter how hard we try, we're not going to be able to make it all light, because it's not meant to be. It's meant to be the field of battle, the field of Kurukshetra, literally, which is what the Bhagavad Gita is about. It's the field of battle on which we confront our delusions and ultimately triumph over them, and then we exit from the dream. And then the dream goes on. One of the things that Swamiji said that I've always just really enjoyed meditating on, the moment you're out of this world, it ceases to exist for you. It's not that it ceases to exist, because for all those who are still in it, it's still there. And even from the astral world, you can observe this world if your consciousness is expanded, and you can participate in this world and help people from the astral world. When one of my friends died, when Paula died, she was one of there were a few of us who died in our 30s or 40s. I say us, which is sort of this tribe of the same chronological age who is now in our 60s and 70s. A few of us left in our 30s and 40s, but not many. Paula left in her 40s. She was a very advanced soul. She left her body completely consciously. And I said to Swamiji after she was gone, I said, "Sir, I really feel like she's watching and helping all the time." Swami's response was, "Oh yes, of course." That it's just, her spiritual advancement was such that she moved out of this world, but her desire to continue to serve and uplift and to love her friends, of whom I count myself honored to be one of them, it never stopped. At very difficult times in my life, I've actually prayed to her. And I felt her response. I feel like she's with me at different times when I really needed her presence. She was a mentor to me. She was a mentor to me in life. I modeled myself after her because she was so just utterly loving and utterly accepting. And I was always, I'm always analyzing and weighing, and Paula was just heart, perfect heart. So I loved being her friend because I could absorb her vibrations. And when I've needed that vibration, I prayed for it. Just as I did when she was here. So what I'm saying is, there's an awareness that can be there if you want it. But there's another reality, which is it just disappears. It's just not your real world anymore. And there's either one goes into unconsciousness if you're not advanced enough to retain consciousness, but it's just gone. It's just not there anymore. No matter how intense, no matter how horrific the accident, no matter how intense the field of battle on which you died, no matter how much the struggle of the illness might be, when you're out of your body, you're just out of your body. It's not there anymore. So we take it so seriously when we're here, but the end for everyone is that we're withdrawn. I had this wonderful dream once. Haven't thought about it in a long time, although some of you have heard it, I'll repeat it here. You know how dreams are often a really strange combination of different things. Well, in this dream, I was going to have my head cut off. And I was being executed for cause, I have no idea why. And it didn't matter, really. I was just going to be there and I was going to have my head cut off. And this man that I know, who is a very dear friend of mine, very sweet man, just really kind, and was always a wonderful support to me. He and his whole family, wonderful support to me. He was my executioner. There was no ill will, he was just my executioner. And the execution was going to be with one of those battle axes that you see in cartoons. You know, the long thing with the sort of curved blade like that, the classic medieval battle axe. And we were on this big empty area, huge empty area. There was just nothing around and no one around. And there was this big, like a tree stump that was right there. And I was going to have to lay my head down on the tree stump. And my friend was going to lift up the battle axe like that and just come down and sever my head from my body, and then I would die. And it was all very companionable, very relaxed. I wasn't nervous. There was no animosity. It was just supposed to happen. And I just, kind of like went like this. And just as, I'm sort of like here, and he's lifting up this battle axe, and he's just bringing it down, it crosses my mind that this might hurt. And this is the first time that it's crossed my mind that there might be pain involved. And just as that thought occurred to me, I also remembered that Master said, oh, when the soul knows the body is about to be mangled and become completely useless, it exits just before the impact, which is actually a very interesting point. And if you hear people sometimes who are in big accidents, they'll tell you that just before the crash, they were suddenly watching it from above. They weren't really in their body when the smash happened. And anyway, it's just a very interesting point. So there it was. I remembered it. So I pulled out. So I didn't actually experience my head being severed, although my head was severed. And I started just rising up like this. And as I went up, I could see where we'd been. I could see my friend like this. And it was sort of like this, it was like spotlit on this huge empty stage. And as I was going like this, looking down, I said, "Bye-bye, Asha." Just like that. It was like, it's been great, nice knowing you, it's all over now. And it was just that, what Swami said, when it's over, it's just over, like that. And then I woke up, and I woke up exceedingly happy, not only because it had been such a wonderful way to exit my body, but I was so pleased with my subconscious that I could actually have a dream where all those elements would be at place and everything went up. You know, spiritually speaking, it all went up. And that was my spontaneous reaction. And I've prayed ever since that that be more than a dream, that when it is time to exit this body, I just say goodbye. Goodbye to her. You know, she's been great. We've had a lot of fun. Now it's all over, like that. So let me think, where was I with all of this? I was trying to remember how I got all the way to leaving the body. Oh yes, it was about the necessity to uplift this world. That was it. It's that just because it's a dream doesn't mean that we don't have any obligation, because we have to take those actions which release us from our karmic involvement. And the most liberating action we can do is to constantly reject the ego's assertion that I am separate and I have to take care of myself, and that my happiness lies in taking care of myself rather than in forgetting myself and serving others. See, self-realization is not perfecting what we think of as me. It's completely forgetting what I think of as me. It's absolute self-forgetfulness. And this is another one of those things where we get really confused, because we keep trying to make ourselves perfect. And in the preoccupation with the preoccupation with becoming perfect, we become so self-involved that the self-involvement prevents us from the realization that we seek, if you can follow that. It's not from paying more and more attention to ourselves. It's from forgetting ourselves. And what is the best way to forget ourselves? Oh, you need something, let me do it for you. Let me give you something. Let me give you something that was mine. Let me give you something that was mine that I was attached to. You know, I've tried to follow a policy in my life that, you know, just as well, it's a Whispers from Eternity that Master wrote that I've always remembered. When I can spend as happily for others as I spend for myself. And I know I've talked about that on many different occasions. It's a very interesting thought. Doesn't mean one should never spend for oneself, because Master suggested a balanced life. But nonetheless, if it gives me just as much joy to give to others as I enjoy getting for myself, because am I different? The more we affirm that, the more we give our energy, just like the avatars do, for the upliftment of others. And then also, you see, we begin to get in tune, and I started to say it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it builds on itself. Because wherever inspiring work is being done, Krishna tells us, there I am. And so if you're there where God is, then He inspires you to do more. And in that inspiration, you feel more and more free. And in that greater freedom, you feel more inspiration. And it's liberating in the spiritual sense. It's just gradually you have overcome your karmic involvement, because the ego is washed away, not by suppression, not by, you know, hard discipline, but by the experience that it's more blessed, because more blissful to give. And that's what's shown to us. It's just more blissful to give. And it becomes actually intensely painful to hold back, rather than feeling, oh, I'm really taking care of myself. One wakes up in the night thinking, why did I keep that for myself? Why didn't I give it away? You know, why am I holding on to that? And it's what's day to the worldly man is night to the yogi. And what's night to the worldly man is day to the yogi. Swamiji said once, his family was well-to-do. His father was very successful and wise in his investments, and frugal, and also generous and good and noble and honorable in countless ways. So Swamiji grew up in a milieu where there were many successful people. His parents had a house in Atherton, which in the Bay Area is a very, very high high-level area of the area. And they had a home in Scarsdale, which of course is notorious for being a very well-to-do place outside of New York City. So Swami was sitting at the dinner table once with his parents. Really, yeah, with his parents, at least with his mother. And Swami just said, just as a matter of course, this was long after he was a disciple and so on. He said, it's so puzzling to me when people have so much money and they just spend it all on themselves. And his mother, who was very spiritual really, she said, my, that's an unusual perspective. And Swami's thought, he didn't articulate it, was, what other perspective can it be? You know, that people just acquire vast sums of money to spend on themselves? To Swami, it was absolutely incomprehensible. And he earned literally millions of dollars over the years, and all of it went to Ananda. He had virtually nothing. Went to Master's work in one way or another. He wrote toward the end of his life, in 2004 actually, he wrote Material Success and Happiness Through Yogic Principles, and it is really one of the great prosperity courses that's ever been written. And it's a little hard to find. If you can't find it easily on Ananda America, go to Ananda India, and you can find it there. For reasons that are obscure to me, it's hard to find, but you can find it in Ananda India. But I was asked to write the publicity for that at one point. And I wrote, except for the fact that Swami Kriyananda has given away every penny that he's earned, his would be one of the most impressive rags to riches story ever told. He was 36 years old. He had been thrown out of Selfrealization Fellowship, where he'd been a monk for the last 14 years. He was forbidden to contact any of the people who'd been associated with in SRF, which meant everybody he knew, all his friends. He had no resources. Well, maybe he had $1,000. He might have had even $1,500. That's all he had. He owned absolutely nothing. He was back at his parents' house, living in their spare bedroom. He had no profession because he'd been a monk since he was 22 years old. He'd been quite prominent in that work, but what do you do on your resume? You just don't get a job, monk, you know? It's just like nobody's advertising for one. So he had no friends, essentially no money, no resources, no job prospects. And from that, everything that is Ananda, he did it all. And he did it day after day after day, behaving just like the Gita says here. I never cease to labor for the upliftment of others. And at the end, he had nothing material. He had communities, and he had thousands of people who loved him and people who would have taken care of him in all circumstances. But personally, he had nothing. So anyway, I said, except for the fact that he ended up as poor as he started, it was rags to riches on a phenomenal scale. But the real riches, of course, was it's more blessed to give than to receive. What an example. And much greater than most of us can follow. That's just simply a fact. Let's see. I think I'll tell this story. It's a little bit off the subject, but it's very important. When Swami used to visit, I'm speaking to you from the Palo Alto community where I live. I've lived here for more than 30 years. And Swamiji, when he would travel internationally, he would almost always fly out of the San Francisco airport, which is a mere 30 minutes from here. So when he was at Ananda Village, which was his main home in America, which is about 4 hours from north of here, he would come here to this community, and he would often stay for several days, and then he would leave the country from San Francisco. And when he would return, he would usually stay here for several days. In addition, he made it a habit to come and go. So he was often in this community. And one time when he was here for a number of days, he decided he would give satsangs. He didn't always give satsangs. Sometimes he just visited with a few of us. But he would give satsangs. And so we set up different groups that would meet with him. And we had these two different groups within our community. One of them is the Sevaka, which is a monastic order, even though it's not a celibate monastic order. It's for families and couples. This is all separate from the Nayaswami order. It gets a little confusing. But it was a monastic order. It was for people who lived in community, who had the karmic freedom to be able to make Ananda the center of their life. That would be a way to, who wanted to and could. Then we had another order which was called the Sadhaka, called the Sadhaka order, and by contrast we called that a lay order. And the sadhakas, it's not that nobody in a community could be a sadhaka, but you couldn't be a sevaka unless you lived in community. And almost all the sadhakas did not live in community. And the reason they didn't live in community is because they didn't have the karmic freedom to be able to make Ananda the central reality. They had a career that they felt they needed to follow and should follow. This is not in any way, I'm not judging it. They had a career perhaps they should follow. They had a spouse or they had children who had karma. They had some kind of responsibility that allowed them to be completely dedicated to serving God, but in a slightly different context, a lay order context, if you think of it like that. Except for the monastic style here was not traditional convent or monastery. Otherwise, the picture is perfect there. In medieval times, the monasteries were often supported by the lay disciples, the householders who supported them. So we had two different, but sometimes it was a little obscure, even to the people in the sadhaka order, what was the difference between being a sadhaka and a sevaka, because they often felt really dedicated to God. So we had two satsangs, and we had a satsang for the sevakas, and then we had one for the sadhakas, or I don't know what the order was. So Swami turns to me before the sadhaka satsang, and he says to me, "What should I talk about?" I said, "Swamiji, why don't you talk about what it means to be a sadhaka? Because I think it would help people to get a clearer idea from you of what that life should look like." So he said, "Sure." So then he sits down and he gives this extraordinarily beautiful satsang, in which he talks about being expelled from SRF when he was 36, just as I was talking about, finding himself living in his parents' house, and then gradually having to figure out how to put his life back together, gradually feeling the call from God that he should go back into public teaching, and then he begins to earn a little bit of money, starts thinking about making the Ananda community. This is all just very, very new. He's just beginning. And he's living with his parents, and his parents are letting him use one of their cars. And at a certain point, his father says generously, "You're using this car all the time. I would just like to give it to you." And he's, has the ownership slip, and he's just going to write it over to Swami. Swami's telling us this story. Swami actually begins to cry. Tears begin to come down his face. Now, at the end of Swami's life, he wept often and easily. But at that stage of Swami's life, it was very rare for Swami to actually show that kind of emotion. He was just much more self-contained. But just tears began to run down his face. And he said, I was a monk. I was a fully professed monk. I had given everything to Master. I own nothing, he said, and now I was going to have to own this car. And he said, and there was no way to say no to my father. It was so generous of him, and I was using the car anyway. I couldn't not take responsibility for it. So I had to accept it. He said, but I can't begin to tell you how intensely painful it was for me to have to own that car. Now, we're all just sitting here like this, and like everybody in the room owns a car. And all of us are proud of our cars. And some of us have upgraded our cars, and we're driving cars that are, that we really like to drive. And he's weeping because he has to own a car like this. So somehow the moment passed, and he mastered himself, and he just said a little bit more. And then the satsang was almost over. So he turns to me. I was sitting right next to him. He said, "Is there anything else I should talk about?" I say, "You could talk to people about what it means to be a sadhaka," like this. He looks at me, and then he looks at the crowd, and he said, "That's all I have been talking about." it's like he's talking about an absolute state of renunciation. And he said, that's all I have been talking about. Then he looks really strongly at everyone. He said, don't even think about living the way I live. You wouldn't be able to do it, and it wouldn't even be good for you to try. Just like that. So, that not much more was explained then, but of course I've given the matter a lot of thought. We have to be who we actually are. And a lot of the confusion between the sadhakas and the sevakas, and you don't have to understand it, nobody at Ananda understands it, it's a constant conversation, is why aren't people recognizing me for being more than I am? Or who am I really? I'm as dedicated, or they're not as dedicated as I am, like this. Swami was showing us what absolute renunciation really looks like. Be content where you are. Do the best you can with where you are. This is what it looks like. And of course, if you don't have that example in front of you, now the sevakas need that example in front of them too. This is what complete renunciation looks like. So how close are we? What more can we do? I mean, not one of us would weep when we got a new car. It would never cross our minds to do such a thing. But Swami did. You see, it's a wholly different. And if we didn't have examples like that, I always like to pull up this book, because this book I think is a really, really helpful one. 45 years of life with Swami. Who was he? What was the example that he set? This isn't about worshiping Swamiji. This isn't about replacing Yogananda with Kriyananda. This is about understanding what the spiritual path really looks like. This is when you have nothing personal to gain and nothing compels you, and there's nothing in the three worlds that you desire or need to acquire, and you still never let a day pass, literally, without doing something serviceful and uplifting. I mean, that's the example that we have to walk through. And really nothing less. Now, we have to live it in our own way, because it wouldn't be right for us even to try. And see, this is where also the inaction, action argument, which, I mean, that's was, I'm just thinking about it now, that's what was so intuitively false about these brilliant people spinning all these ideas. And most of them actually became more mature and serious on the spiritual path, but some of them actually in that group were sunk because of their mental confusion. But what it was, the inaction of a saint is because there's no karmic compulsion. The inaction of a person who's filled with desires and has so much karma is just laziness and cowardice. And that's what I could see. I could see tremendous worldliness without the courage to really confront it. So we're just going to try to find an easy way, which was we're just going to kind of find a loophole in the system. And actually, several of the people who advocated that actually became drug addicts, of all things. Isn't that strange? My little coterie of people who were all helped me get on the path, a couple of them had real serious drug problem, because it was escapism, that they were using the path for escapism. They were not using the path to give them courage for the battle. And you see, that's what the whole Bhagavad Gita is that Arjuna, and when you have the whole compelling story of the Mahabharata behind it, which I'm sure I've dealt with it much earlier, it's like Arjuna and his brothers have done everything possible to avoid having to fight delusion to the death. And it's symbolic, because that's sort of what we do. We just keep thinking, I can just keep a little of this. I know that I myself have had to go through that in my life. This is mine by right, and it doesn't hurt anybody. That's what Gyanamata would say. But everything, you have to be, either it will be taken from you, or you need to willingly give it up, or you have to be so indifferent that you don't even notice whether it's there with you or not. And that's just everything. And before we do that, before we recognize, as Swami writes in the Path, the magnitude of the revolution and the transformation that Master was calling us to. He said many people thought Master was charming and inspiring, and they barely suspected what he was really asking of them. So in the Mahabharata, Arjuna and his brothers have done everything possible to avoid this final confrontation, which spirit will triumph and materialism will die, or spirit will give up and materialism will win. And he's right on the eve of battle, and the forces are arrayed. Krishna takes him, he asks for Krishna to take him in the middle, and Arjuna says, I don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it. I don't want to have to kill. I don't want to fight that hard. I don't want to give up everything. And Krishna says, and among wonderful phrases he says, words to the effect, you're using words that sound wise, but your actual motivation is that you're a coward. And then he just says things like, if you don't fight, if you don't carry out this fight, your name will be mud forever. Your reputation will be ruined, you'll betrayed your brothers, and no one will ever respect you, ever. Like that. It's written more poetically than that, but basically that's what's said. Because eventually, that's really what it comes to. So, the peculiarity of my friends, and as I said, I'm saying it out loud because I hadn't really thought it through like this, was that they were just trying to escape the battle by using this very clever reasoning and drawing the Vedanta teachings into it. They were also sincere, and I have to give them that. But there was still that hope that I could find a shortcut. And a lot of people do. I've observed that Ananda has what I call a magnetic honesty. Anything you try to go around, it follows you, and sooner or later it's like that. And so it's just better to embrace it from the start. Well, my friends, I think that will give us enough to keep us going for another week or two until we reconvene. So God bless you, my friends.